question. We all know that literature influences film through novels being adapted into movies, for example, but how strongly does the influence run the other way? We're wondering, film influencing literature. In other words, having had a previous novel adapted into a major movie, do you now find that the latent cinematic potential of your work influences your writing? Says he could imagine trying to write the description of that cabin, thinking, how can I describe this in such a way that they'll understand my intention when they go to film it? When you were reading it, I was thinking, that's what can't get captured in some of that description.
Well, that's an interesting part of, that difference. How would you, that last part that I read, where Luce, she's lying in bed at that point at night, and she's still scared, still thinking about that black hole and those children. How do you do that in a movie? I mean, you're one of the hard and fast rules they try to teach people in film school these days is if you have to use a voiceover, you're on the wrong track. I happen to kind of like voiceovers. But, how would you do that? I mean, there's really, you have, it wouldn't be the same information. You'd have to try to find some substitute information for that. But I don't try to, if ever a little flicker of thought about a movie comes into my head when I'm writing, I try to get rid of it because I don't want to, as I've been saying, the difference is in the way the two forms tell stories are in many ways so opposite that I feel like I'll be screwing up the novelistic parts of it if I think about that. But as I was saying this morning, the visual, I almost never come up with an idea for a book or an idea for what to do in the book from an abstract idea or a theme or anything like that. I never think about it. It's the last thing I think about. I think about two guys driving in a car on a windy mountain road, and the lights from the dashboard are reflecting on their faces, and one of them smoking a cigarette. And the lights, the headlights are like two overlapping cones out there in the darkness, and what's playing on the radio, and then who are those two guys? And that's one of the first images I got for this book was that. And there's certainly not a theme there. There's character, there's place, there's a situation of some kind that suggests plot. But that's where I started. Luce came from just picturing this old lodge on a lake falling down, this young woman staying there by herself. The first image in my mind was the lake on a really flat day, real flat mirror-like finish, and really dark water, and Luce standing on the porch looking out. The children came from just this notion of you couldn't let them out in the yard because they killed the chickens. And, that's where my ideas come from. Well, sometimes I'm envious of writers who say, well, I wanted to express the theme of manipulation to you. Doesn't work.
I want to get back to language in a minute, but I want to set it up with talking about the previous two books in that authenticating an historical narrative is usually done with setting and characters, but you also recreate in Cold Mountain, for example, what sounds like an authentic language that helps transport your reader to that long ago time. How do you find the words and then figure out the ways to use them so naturally? And I don't know if you picked out any passages for kind of capturing the language of the time.
Well, there are several things. And one of the first things when I was thinking about language for Gold Mountain is I really don't like dialect very much. And when I read a book and I get to a place where liquor is spelled with 2 A's, something shuts down in me. So that was one rule, is try as much as possible to get the flavor of the language of the Mountain South through something besides spelling things. As I got into it, I realized there were some categories of things. There were kitchen implements, farm implements, weapons, and I was doing a lot of reading. I was going over to the library. We were living in Raleigh at the time. Going over to the library of Chapel Hill a lot and just reading everything I could about 19th century farming. And I remembered my grandparents' farm was very much a 19th century farm. There was not an internal combustion engine on the place, other than electricity. That was the only modern thing. Tried to remember that, and then looked up the names of implements. So I'd get to words like spurtle and keeler and those kinds of words. And then I began to develop rules that were like, okay, never stop and say, she picked up a spurtle, comma, a pedal-like device for and I told my editor, I said, here are my rules, that I will give the category of thing. You know it's a kitchen, you know it's farming, you know it's a part of a weapon or something. But don't ask me to explain it. So that kind of thing helped, and it helped not have to make a decision every single time. This falls into this category, this is the way I'm going to handle it. But a lot of it was rhythm, the rhythm of the language, and thinking about the way I knew a lot of people when I was a kid who became adults in the 19th century. My grandfather was born, depending on who you believe, either in the late 1870s or in 1880. And I would, days where I could hear the rhythm of his voice and my grandmother's voice, not so much words when they were talking to me, if I could just remember just the music of their voices, then I felt like I was going to have a good day of writing. I don't know whether I found a passage that exactly does that, but this is the ones that Stavrod was the main character, always brought out some of that in me. Stavrod is Ruby's father. He's coming off to the war. She assumes he's either deserted or been killed on the first day he showed up in town. And Ada and Ruby have been having corn missing out of their corn crib, so Ruby sets a trap and puts a little bit of padding around the jaws of the trap. And she comes out the next morning, and here's this fella kind of reclined on the ground by the corn crib with his arm in a hole that he's dug through the chinking in it. And she doesn't know who he is from and walks up to him, and there's her father. And but this is also an example of differences in the book and the movie. So you're not dead, Ruby said. Not yet, said Stavrod. Set your daddy loose. Ruby propped the shotgun against the side of the crib and unlocked the door and went inside. She unstaked the trap from the dirt floor and pried open the jaws from around Stavrod's hand and walked back outside. Despite the padding, after he drawn his arm from out the hole in the chinky. Starbright stood and dripped blood from a cut to his wrist where his skin was thin over the bones. His forearm was bruised and blue all around him. He rubbed it with his good hand, took out a kerchief of fine linen, and removed his hat and wiped his forehead and neck. Long night of standing here trapped, he said. No doubt, Ruby said. She looked him over. He had changed some. He seemed such an old man standing there before her, his hair half gone from his head, whiskers grizzled. He'd not filled out any, though. He was still just a little wimpy man. Quilting frame had more flesh to it. How old are you now? She said. He stood moving his mouth a little as he tried to do the figures in his mind. Maybe 45, he said eventually. 45, Ruby said. About. You don't look it, she said. Thank you. I meant it the other way. Anybody else, Ruby said, I'd ask you why you've been dipping our corn when you don't look hurting for money. But I know you better than that. You're going around getting a little here and a little there to run a batch of liquor. And you took that suit off somebody or won it in the card game. Starbright says, oh, something like. You've run off from the fight, no doubt. I was owed furlough, being a hero as I was. You? Every battle I was in, I led the charge. Ruby said, I've heard it told that the officers like to run the greatest shitheels to the fore. They get shut off quicker that way. Then before Starbright could answer, she said, you come on with me. She picked up the shotgun, went to the house. She told her to sit on the porch steps and wait. Inside, she lit a fire and put on a pot to make coffee. She mixed biscuit dough and rattled around about and put breakfast together. Biscuits, grits, and eggs, a few strips of fried side meat. Ada came down and sat in her chair by the window and drank coffee, glum as usual in the early morning. We finally caught something in that trap, Ruby said. Well, it's about time. What was it? My daddy. He's out on the porch now. Pardon? Ada said. Starbright, he made it home from the war, but alive or dead, he's a little matter to me. A plate of breakfast, and we'll send him on his way. Ada rose and looked out the door at Starbright, stand back where he sat humped up on the bottom step. He held his left hand out before him, and he hummed to himself, and the fingers were working, tapping against the heel of his hand like a man doing psalms. You might have asked him in, Ada said, when she had returned to her chair. He could wait out there, Ruby said. When breakfast was cooked, Ruby carried his plate to the table under the pear tree. She and Ada took their breakfast in the dining room. They could see him from the window. Starbright ate quick and with urgency, his hat brim bobbing in time with his chewing. He stopped just short of picking up his plate and licking the last skim of grease from it. He could have eaten in here, Ada said. That's where I draw the line, Ruby said. She went outside to collect his plate. You got somewhere to go, she asked him. Starbright told her he did indeed have a home and a society of sorts. He'd fallen in with a collection of heavily armed outliers. They lived in a deep cave of the mountain like free-will savages. All they wished to do was hunt and eat and lay up all night drunk, making music. Well, I guess that suits you, Ruby said. Your aim in life always was to dance all night with a bottle in your hand. Now I've fed you. You can get out of here. We've got nothing else for you. You go dip in our corn again, I might put a barrel of shot into you and I won't load the salt. She flapped her hands at him, adding as if shoeing cattle. He walked off as a saunter. So